You can't be serious, Erica. That's not your place. The words came sharp and fast, slicing through the conference room like a scalpel. My father didn't even raise his voice, he didn't need to. His tone alone made the entire boardroom fall into a suffocating hush. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. I sat up straighter, keeping my hands steady on the table, though the tightness in my chest made it hard to breathe. With all due respect, I said, evenly, I wouldn't make this recommendation if I didn't believe it was the best move for the company. He stared at me for a long second, and I could practically see the calculations flickering behind his eyes. Not once did he look at me as his daughter. To him, I was just a disruption, a problem sitting across the table, dressed in a tailored blazer. My name is Erica Landstrom. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years working my way up from the ground floor of Landstrom Energy, my father's company, my family's empire, and somehow, despite the years, the hours, the sleepless nights and ignored birthdays, I still wasn't enough, because I wasn't Scott. My older brother had been groomed to run this place since he was 13. He got the mentorship, the confidence, the seat at the table. I got polite dismissals and performance reviews that ended with, not quite ready. But I didn't stop. I didn't ask for a seat, I built my own. I learned everything, from drilling operations in Texas oil fields to the headaches of federal compliance filings. I put in more hours than anyone else in my cohort. And still, I was invisible in the boardroom. Until now. That morning, I'd walked in with a 40-page proposal and the numbers to back it up. A long overdue pivot toward renewables. A cleanup of legacy liabilities. And a new operational framework that would save the company $18 million over 5 years. But none of that mattered. Because the suggestion came from me. Not from Scott. This is ridiculous, Scott said from the far end of the table. You're going to throw away decades of infrastructure because my sister read a few green energy blogs? I didn't even look at him. I'm basing this on market data, not blogs. The shift is happening whether we like it or not. If we don't adapt now, we'll be obsolete in 10 years. The room stayed quiet. Then my father leaned forward, eyes cold, calculating. And you think you know better than all of us? Better than me? I looked him in the eye. And for the first time in my life, I said it. Yes, I replied. In this case, I do. The silence that followed was thick and electric. He sat back in his chair. We're done here. Everyone else stood, grabbing their files and pretending not to stare as they left. Scott gave me a smug, sideways smile as he passed, like he couldn't wait to watch me crash and burn. The door clicked shut, and I was alone with the man who had built this empire, and who had never once believed I was strong enough to inherit it. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. You've got guts. I'll give you that. I stayed still, hands in my lap. But guts don't always equal wisdom. He added, You're playing with fire, Erica. No, I said quietly. I'm trying to stop the company from burning down. He stood. I expected him to dismiss me. Maybe even tell me to pack my things. But he just nodded once, tightly, and walked out. And that's when I knew something had shifted. Not in him. In me. I didn't go back to my office right after the meeting. I couldn't. My hands were still shaking. My pulse thudded like a war drum in my ears. And my father's voice echoed again and again in my head. You think you know better than me? I'd said yes. Out loud. In front of everyone. I'd said yes. I found myself in the stairwell instead, gripping the cold metal railing like it was the only thing keeping me from collapsing. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind something more dangerous, doubt. What if I'd gone too far? What if I'd just guaranteed my own exit? No. I forced myself to breathe. Slow, deep, focused. I had the data, the projections. I had support, at least from a few allies buried in the middle tiers of management. Rebecca Morgan, for one, and maybe even Marcus Langston, though he'd always been cautious with praise. But Dad, he wasn't going to let this go easily. Not because I was wrong, but because I was right, and he couldn't stand that it was me who saw the cracks forming before they did. When I finally stepped out into the hallway again, the building felt different, not colder, just quieter, like everyone was watching now, waiting. I headed toward my office, heels clicking on the tile, trying to remind myself I belonged here. That I'd earned this. As I passed the corner conference room, I heard it, just a sliver of sound. A voice. Familiar. Scott. He wasn't alone. I paused. You don't have to worry. She won't get anywhere. I'll keep Dad close. By the time they figure it out, we'll already be offshore. A long silence. Then, just transfer the next payment to the Zurich account. Same routing number. I stepped back. Slowly, heart pounding. The phone call ended with a soft beep. And I heard the scrape of a chair. I ducked into the hallway restroom and waited. Seconds later, Scott passed by the door, muttering something into his phone. I didn't move until the silence returned. He was hiding something, selling something. I didn't have the proof. Not yet, but I knew that tone. That arrogance. That carelessness he always wore when he thought no one was watching. And I wasn't just anyone anymore. Back in my office, I closed the door, locked it, and sat down hard. My fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up internal memos, financial reports, anything I could cross-reference. Something wasn't right. The numbers didn't line up. Bonuses were paid out months after missed targets. Vendor invoices were higher than projected. Some accounts had strange routing tags I hadn't seen before. He was bleeding the company. Slowly, quietly. And my father didn't see it. Or worse, he saw. And chose not to. That night, I met with Rebecca. We sat in a quiet wine bar downtown. One of those places with dim lighting and no music, where conversations stay private and the waiters know when not to hover. You did good today, she said, sipping from her glass. Most people wouldn't dare challenge him like that. I don't want praise, I said. I want clarity. She raised an eyebrow. Meaning? I leaned in. How long have you known Scott's been moving money out of the company? She didn't blink, but her eyes hardened. You saw it? Not everything. Enough to know he's covering something up. Rebecca exhaled slowly, staring into her glass like it held the answers. I've suspected for a year. But your father, he's willfully blind when it comes to Scott. He'd rather burn the whole thing down than admit his golden boy lit the match. My stomach twisted. So you've done nothing? I didn't have the leverage, she said, looking at me dead on. But you might. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the dining table long after Mark went to bed. My laptop glowing in the dark. Files open in every window. Spreadsheets layered with tabs and red flags. I was connecting dots faster now. A fake contract with a shell vendor. A sudden increase in executive travel expenses. And then, one buried line in a Q4 report from last year, Zurich wire transfer. Project R17, $350 confidential development advance. R17 wasn't a project. It didn't even exist. And Zurich matched what I'd overheard. That was my twist. That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't just about legacy anymore. It wasn't about proving I was worthy. Scott was actively sabotaging the company. And my father, blinded by pride, was helping him do it by refusing to see. Now I had a choice to make. Expose them both? Or wait, gather more, and strike when it hurt most? I stared at the screen. The transfer highlighted in yellow. I already knew my answer. I didn't go to the morning meeting to win. I went to watch them squirm. The boardroom was already filling when I arrived. I wore black, not for intimidation, not for flair, but because it made me feel invincible. Like armor, like silence. I didn't greet anyone. I didn't need to. Scott was already at the table, tapping his pen against his notepad like he was trying to pretend he had something useful to say. And my father, he sat at the head of the table like nothing was wrong. Like his empire wasn't bleeding out from under his feet. The only sign that something had cracked was the tension in his jaw. And the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Let's begin, he said, as if he still controlled the room. I slid the binder forward, the one labeled strictly, Q4 internal audit findings. I didn't speak at first. I let them flip through the opening pages. Let them see the numbers, the projections, the lies. Then I spoke. I've cross-referenced the vendor payouts with the actual deliverables completed. There are consistent overcharges, inflated invoices, and in one case, a contractor that doesn't even exist. Boz's chair creaked. That's absurd. We vetted every contractor through legal. Except this one doesn't have a federal ID number. I replied. It's a shell, registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. I turned the page for them. Highlighted, circled, annotated. My father stayed silent. Scott didn't. You're digging into confidential accounts you have no clearance for. I have all the clearance I need, I said. And what I'm digging into is fraud. You authorized these payments. You signed off. His face flushed. Dad, she's twisting the data. This is just some power play. Shut up, Scott, I said. The room fell so silent I could hear the AC click on. Everyone froze. I leaned forward, my voice lower now. Do you know what Zurich is good for? Privacy, secrecy. But even Switzerland has its limits. Especially when a U.S. corporation wires money under a fake project name. Scott opened his mouth, but I held up a single finger. Don't. You are either stupid or you think the rest of us are. And right now, I'm not sure which one makes me angrier. My father finally spoke. That's enough. You've made your point. Not yet, I said, and then I passed the file to the board's compliance officer. If I were anyone else, I said, I could have taken this outside the company. Straight to the SEC. The DOJ. But I brought it here. Because I still believe this company deserves to survive. Even if the men who ran it don't. My father stood slowly, but I beat him to it. You always said leadership was about responsibility. I said, well, it's time to take some. Scott will step down, effective immediately. And if you care at all about your shareholders, you'll support a full internal restructuring plan, one that doesn't include either of you at the top. The board murmured. Someone at the far end was already flipping back through the documents. Eyes widened, mouths moved. I had them now. I could feel it. Scott lunged to his feet. Who the hell do you think you are? And I looked him dead in the eyes. Someone who finally stopped waiting for permission. That was when the twist landed, my father. Breaking his silence, not with denial, but with a question. You want control. Is that it? You want the company? I want the truth to mean something again, I said, and if that means stepping into the role neither of you were ever fit to hold. Then yes, I'll take it. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw fear. Not rage, not disappointment. Fear. Because he knew, this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was the beginning of the end. And I was the one holding the fuse. I didn't go to the morning meeting to win. I went to watch them squirm. The boardroom was already filling when I arrived. I wore black, not for intimidation, not for flair, because it made me feel invincible. Like armor, like silence. I didn't greet anyone. I didn't need to. Scott was already at the table, tapping his pen like he was pretending to have something useful to say. And my father, he sat at the head like nothing was wrong. Like his empire wasn't bleeding beneath him. His jaw was tight. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. Let's begin, he said, still pretending he controlled the room. I slid the binder forward, Q4 internal audit findings. I didn't speak right away. Let them flip. Let them see what I'd seen. The overcharges, the inflated invoices, the lies. Then I began. I've cross-referenced the vendor payouts with the actual deliverables. One in particular, a shell contractor registered to a P.O. box in Delaware, has no federal ID. Boz's chair creaked. That's absurd. We vetted. Not this one. I turned the page. Highlighted. Circled. Signed. Scott tried to interrupt. You have no clearance to. I have all the clearance I need. I snapped. And what I found is fraud. You authorized the payments. You signed them. He flushed red. She's twisting the data. This is just a power play. Shut up, Scott. The room froze. And then I leaned forward. Do you know what Zurich is good for? Privacy. But even Switzerland has limits. Especially when a U.S. company wires money under a fake project name. He opened his mouth, but I raised one finger. Don't. You're either stupid, or you think the rest of us are. I don't know which one makes me angrier. My father finally spoke. That's enough. Not yet, I said, and passed the file to the compliance officer. If I were anyone else, I continued, this would already be in the hands of the DOJ. But I brought it here. Because I still believe this company deserves to survive, even if its leadership doesn't. My father stood slowly, but I beat him to it. You always said leadership meant taking responsibility. Well, it's time. Scott will step down, effective immediately. And if you care at all about the shareholders, You'll support a full internal restructuring plan, without either of you at the top. Murmurs, eyes shifting, papers flipping. I had them. Scott bolted up. Who the hell do you think you are? I looked him dead in the eye. Someone who finally stopped waiting for permission. That's when the twist landed. My father's voice, low and shaky. You want control. That's what this is about. I didn't blink. No, I want the truth to mean something again. And if that means taking the seat neither of you were ever fit to hold, then yes, I'll take it. And in that moment, I saw it, not rage, not disappointment, fear, because he knew this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a reckoning, and I was the one holding the fuse. He didn't try to stop me when I walked out. That night, across from Mark in our kitchen, I told him everything, the report, the confrontation, my demand. He was quiet for a long time, then simply said, "So what now?" I exhaled. Now I use it, not to be CEO, to take the reins without the title. And the next morning, I did. I gathered the board, without Scott, without my father. I showed them the contingency plan I'd spent weeks preparing, appointed interim leaders, proposed a rebranding partnership with a rising clean energy startup, made it clear this was the only path forward. When it ended, the chairman stood and shook my hand. You've just saved Landstrom Energy. The fuse didn't just light. It exploded. It's strange what silence feels like after a storm. The day after the board approved the transition plan, I found myself sitting alone in the glass-walled office I'd worked so hard to step into, but never dreamed I'd actually hold. Not like this. Not on these terms. The nameplate hadn't changed. My father's things were still boxed up in the hallway. But everything else was different. People looked at me with something new in their eyes now. Not curiosity, not suspicion, respect, and fear. A knock at the door broke my thoughts. It was Rebecca. "It's done," she said quietly, stepping inside. "The press release goes out tomorrow. You sure you're ready for this?" I smiled faintly. Too late to ask now. She studied me for a beat. "They never saw you coming." "No," I said, my voice soft. "They never looked." When she left, I sat back and looked out over the city skyline. The sun was setting behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of fire. And I thought about everything that had led me here. Every night I sat up studying while my brother was praised for just showing up. Every suggestion I gave that was ignored until a man repeated it. Every time I swallowed anger just to be allowed back in the room. And then I thought about my father. We hadn't spoken since the boardroom. He hadn't called. I hadn't reached out. Part of me thought he might show up at my door. With excuses, regret, a speech about legacy and misunderstanding. But silence stretched on. That weekend, I drove to the house I grew up in. Just to see it. Just to remind myself it was real. The lawn was overgrown. The porch sagged a little. The golden plaque with our family name had been removed from the gate. It looked smaller than I remembered. I sat in the car for almost an hour. Watching, waiting. No one came out. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was hollow. And that was somehow worse. I thought winning would feel like revenge. Like power. Like justice. But it felt like grief. Like burying something that had already died years ago but never had a funeral. That night, I stood in Mia's room while she slept, brushing a curl from her cheek. Her tiny hand twitched. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the battles I'd just fought to make sure she'd never have to. Mark came up behind me, his hand gentle on my back. "You okay?" I nodded. "I will be." And I meant it, because this wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about closure. About choosing who I wanted to be now that the fight was over. My father may never apologize. Scott may never understand what he lost. But I had my daughter. I had a future. And I had my name, the one I gave myself. The one I built. Danielle. The girl they left behind. The woman who walked back in. And didn't flinch. Not once. Not ever.